right. Let's see here. Okay, so I have a question from Kachi. It's a sentiment that I think needs to be emphasized a lot more. Again, if you guys have questions, we're going to be doing this for about another 15, 25 minutes or so. We're cool with that, Joel?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Cool. All right. So Kachi says, can the presence of God be proved with human science, or is God an omnipotent force that does not exist in the material plane, meaning science cannot prove nor disprove God's existence or lack thereof?
Great question. So, can you perform an experiment in a laboratory somewhere using the scientific method that gives you some sort of physical results proving that God exists or that God is real? I don't see how you could do that. But that doesn't mean that the reality of God is somehow disconnected from science, or that science and religion and faith are non-overlapping magisteria, as some people say. And the reason why is this: science itself, the very utility of science and its value and meaningfulness as an endeavor presupposes the triune God of Scripture. Now, let me give you a historical example first, and then maybe a biblical explanation and possibly a quick philosophical explanation. Historically, science, as we know it, arose in a Christian context. The scientific revolution was fostered and launched by men like Isaac Newton, Tycho Brahe, Johannes Kepler, Galileo Galilei, and these were professing Christians operating on Christian assumptions. Historically, even at their peak, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Chinese, the Muslim Golden Age, none of these civilizations, non-Christian civilizations, gave us science. Does that mean they didn't give us philosophy or mathematics? No. But they didn't give us science, and the question pertains to science, so that's why I'm talking about science. Christian civilization gave us science because here's the I guess I'll go to the philosophical explanation. Science requires certain presuppositions about the world, certain prior beliefs about the cosmos, the world, that are perfectly in accordance with Christianity. For example, the possibility of inductive reasoning. The uniformity in nature. In other words, the idea that we can do an experiment on Tuesday and with the same conditions do the same experiment on Wednesday, and we would expect to get the same result. If we didn't believe that, we wouldn't repeat science. We wouldn't repeat experiments. We couldn't do science. Science is predicated on the idea that we can repeat experiments, and if something is different, then we want to look for a reason why. We assume that there is a reason why because we would expect things to be the same. Science presupposes that there's a normality, a regularity, a consistency, a faithfulness in the warp and woof of reality that makes science possible. Not only that, but it also assumes that there are immaterial, universal, absolute, objective, knowable laws which govern the world such that the world is intelligible to us and we can make sense of it. It assumes that data is meaningful, data are meaningful, facts are meaningful, and it also has to presuppose the meaningfulness of the way that we process that data with our minds. That our minds are in some sense geared towards truth. Our truth-seeking faculties are just that, truth-seeking faculties. So our senses work, our reasoning works. There's a correspondence between the math in my head and the way the world actually works. Einstein was perplexed by that. Why is the math in my head? Well, how come I can do these a priori synthetic, this is getting into Kant a little bit, but these a priori synthetic operations in my head, and then it turns out I go out and do this in the world, and the world behaves the same way as the numbers and the formulae that I have in my head. Why is that? Well, these are all Christian presuppositions. And so anyone who does science, anyone who does mathematics, I would say, without an expressly Christian framework is either doing so ignorantly or in contradiction with his own worldview. Scripturally, we can look at passages like Psalm 111, which say that the works of God are studied by all those who delight in him. Psalm 19, which say the heavens declare the glory of God. Other passages in Proverbs that say that it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search it out. And then even going back to Genesis 1:27, where it says that God created man in his own image. Well, what is the image of God? Well, we would expect that we would be rational, we would be truth-seeking, we would value truth. Even the idea that we think, science is valuable, because truth is valuable, knowledge is valuable. These are all Christian presuppositions. So all of this is a very long-winded way of saying the minute you've stepped into the lab with the intention of doing any kind of scientific inquiry, you've already had to presuppose the triune God of Scripture. There is no other conception of God or of a metaphysical scheme for the universe which authorizes us epistemologically to engage in anything like scientific inquiry. Now, that's not to say you can't do science and be an atheist. There are plenty of atheistic scientists, but they're doing so inconsistently. There are Muslim scientists. They're doing it inconsistently. There are pagan scientists, and they're doing it inconsistently. And that's not just me making assertions. I mean, investigate the worldview, investigate the Christian worldview, see if it leads to science. I think I've just made the case that it does, humbly. But investigate the worldview of any scientist. See if their fundamental presuppositions about the way the world and the human mind and the laws governing the universe and God, see the way see what are the natural entailments and implications of those presuppositions. Do they lead to the conditions that would give rise to science? And they don't. I've yet to see one that does. I think by the time you enumerate all the necessary preconditions, as people say, for intelligibility of the universe that make science possible, well, you're talking about the Christian worldview at that point. So so again, the long and short of it is, by the time you've stepped in the lab and you intend on doing science, you've already had to presuppose that that God is real.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that answer.